The first thing I noticed wasn't his words. It was the microphone squealing, a harsh feedback that cut through the reception hall and made the chandeliers tremble. My father-in-law held the mic like it was a weapon, his suit pressed sharp as his voice. "Some folks in this family carry the weight," he said, grinning toward the crowd. "They bleed, they sweat, they do the real work." His eyes flicked to me, sitting at the head table in my dress blues. "And some are just nothing." The laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough. A ripple moving across linen-covered tables, past crystal glasses and untouched cake. I sat still, breathing evenly, the metallic taste of restraint already at the back of my throat. Silence spread fast after that. It wasn't absence, it was a pressure. You could hear the small things now, the fizz of champagne spilling from a tipped flute, the scrape of a chair leg across marble, the faint electric buzz of the mic's LED glowing green at 1947. Every eye in the room was fixed on me, waiting to see if I'd flinch, waiting to see if I'd break. I didn't move. My hand rested on a small black write-in-the-rain notebook lying open on the table. My vows were written there, promises in waterproof ink, tucked around something heavier than anyone in that ballroom realized. And then from the far side of the room the priest rose. His collar caught the chandelier's light. He lifted one hand and said calmly, "If the room will permit, the vows deserve to be heard as they were written." He had no idea those vows would do more than fill the silence. They would break it open. San Diego's waterfront was supposed to smell like salt and celebration that night. Instead, when I walked into the reception hall of the hotel, I caught the sharper scents first: floor polish, spilled champagne, and the faint electrical buzz of the chandeliers overhead. The ballroom was dressed to impress. Linen-covered tables, polished cutlery lined up with military precision, and crystal glasses waiting for their cue. But it wasn't the decorations that set the tone, it was the people. On one side of the room, my husband's family filled 3 long tables, their laughter rising above the music. At the center of it all was his father, retired Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Keene, a man whose presence seemed to dominate even when he wasn't speaking. On the other side, my family sat smaller, quieter, a mix of old friends and fellow officers who had driven in from Pendleton and Miramar. The uniforms among the suits and dresses were like beacons of another life, the one I knew best. I've worn the Marine Corps uniform long enough to understand what people see when they look at me. Some see a title, captain. Others see a woman who doesn't fit their definition of real Marine. And some, like my father-in-law, see nothing at all. To him I was a desk Marine, a paper pusher, the one who files reports after the real work is done. The little comments had started early in the day. "Pretty dress, Captain," one of his old buddies said during photos. "Looks better than camouflage, huh?" I smiled even as my stomach tightened. "Depends on the terrain." Later, as I moved between tables greeting guests, a civilian relative leaned close with a laugh. "So you're the one who does the paperwork while the Marines fight?" I answered evenly. "The paperwork that gets them home alive." But I could feel the current running underneath every word, every glance. The comparisons weren't between men and women. They were between those who served with rifles and those who served with pens. In their world, the rifle always won. I wore a simple bracelet on my wrist that night, 3 names etched into the metal. The men I'd served with and lost. No one asked about it. Most of them probably thought it was just jewelry. On the table beside my place card sat a small black write-in-the-rain notebook, the kind you carry into the field, sweat-proof, rain-proof, tear-proof. I'd written my vows in it, not for effect, simply because that's what I trusted to keep my words safe. My eyes swept the room the way they always did. Habit, training, reflex. 2 exits behind the head table. Chafing dishes steaming at the buffet line near the back. The bartender shifting his weight every time a Marine buddy of mine ordered another whiskey. My commanding officer sat with his wife near the middle, posture rigid, eyes neutral, the way a colonel observes when he's on duty but not in uniform. I felt the weight of being observed in a different way though. This wasn't a mission brief. It was a silent court. The room itself had decided my value long before anyone spoke it aloud. Every tilted head, every smirk when my rank was mentioned, every pause when someone realized I wasn't in combat arms, it was all evidence. Evidence that tonight wasn't going to pass without someone turning my career, my life into a punchline. So I did what I've always done. I straightened my shoulders, I kept my breathing even, and I reminded myself of the one thing I could always control: how I responded when the verdict finally came. It started small, the way these things always do, like a hairline crack in glass you can barely see until the whole pane shivers. During the rehearsal dinner, the jokes had come wrapped in warmth and nostalgia. My husband's uncle told a story about his boot camp drill instructor who could make a recruit fold with one raised eyebrow. Laughter rolled down the table like a wave. Someone clapped my shoulder and said, "You've got rank, Captain," but he had presence. I lifted my water glass and smiled. Presence wins parades, plans win wars. I kept that thought where it belonged, quiet. By reception night, the warmth had hardened. The quartet eased into something bright and forgettable, while the bar did the heavy lifting. I felt the room sorting itself the way units do when a storm comes in. Who clusters, who drifts, who looks for high ground. On the groom's side of the ballroom, men who'd known each other for years recalibrated the old chain of command. Senior enlisted at the center, civilians orbiting, a few younger Marines watching the older men for cues. My side officers, a couple of warrant officers, 2 civilian friends from grad school, held steady, talking low, listening more than they spoke. At table 7, a civilian cousin leaned toward me as the salad plates were cleared. "So, Captain," he said, working at a piece of pepper with his fork, "do you actually go out there?" He didn't point anywhere. He didn't have to. Out there meant dust, heat, and uncertainty. "Sometimes," I said. "More often I make sure the people who do have what they need when they get there, and a way home." He nodded, unsatisfied, as if I'd offered him a riddle instead of an answer. Across the room, my father-in-law held court at the bar with 2 of his old buddies. Retired Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Keene didn't brag. He simply existed at a volume everyone else had to match. He joked with the bartender, slapped backs, tilted his chin toward me when he thought I wasn't looking. I saw the way their eyes tracked to my bracelet, to my simple dress, to the black notebook by my place card like it was a prop. "Hey Gunny," one of them said, not bothering to lower his voice, "you think the captain here can pass inspection on that notebook?" Laughter. My father-in-law didn't laugh. He just smiled. The kind of smile that says this will be easy. My husband felt the shift before I said a word. Under the head table he found my hand and squeezed twice. "Here, with you." He didn't look at me. He looked at his father, steady and unblinking, the way a pilot watches weather on the horizon. The MC tapped the mic, the sound shivering through the crystal. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we can gather for our toasts, we'll do it right," my father-in-law said, already moving. The MC smiled, the helpless smile of a man outranked by charisma. The gunny didn't take the microphone. He took the room. It was a practiced movement. 100 mess nights distilled into one easy stride. He stood between the head table and the dance floor, broad shoulders under a perfectly tailored suit, a Marine Corps tie pin flashing under the chandeliers. He didn't start with congratulations. He started with a story. "When my boy was 9, he said, he built a go-kart out of scrap wood, ran that thing downhill like he owned the road. No brakes, no fear. He's been the same ever since." Laughter rolled and settled. He glanced at me. "Then he met a woman who loves order." I felt the room lean in. "Now that's not a bad thing," he went on. "Every unit needs someone to alphabetize the ammo." He paused for the laugh. It came uneasy, scattered. "But in this family we come from Marines who carry weight, who bleed, who do the hard things so the rest of the machine can hum. That's real work." He didn't look at me when he said real. He looked at the junior Marines as if instructing them. A couple stared at the floor. One shifted his jaw and folded his hands tighter in his lap. I kept my face neutral, the way you do when a patrol walks past an argument in the street. Eyes on, emotions off. I lifted my water glass. The rim touched my lip without shaking. The chaplain watched from his table, hands folded, head slightly bowed. He wasn't praying. He was waiting. "Now my new daughter-in-law," the gunny said, rolling the words like he was testing their weight. "She's smart, college smart, paper smart. And hey," he held up his palms, magnanimous. "Everybody's gotta be something." The laugh was bigger this time. It moved like a breeze, flipping napkins, rustling silk. My husband didn't laugh. He hadn't laughed once. "But some things," he said, leaning into the mic, "some things aren't something. They're nothing." He let the silence sit, then smiled. "And we're gonna train the nothing out of her. Family'll take care of that." It's a strange sensation, feeling a word pass through you like a blade, but leaving no blood. I heard the scrape of a chair leg, the quiet curse from a captain at my table, the quartet falter and recover. I set my glass down and laid my palm on the little black notebook beside my plate. The paper inside was thick, water-resistant, meant for rain and sweat and stubborn truth. I had written vows in it, promises lined up with the care of a range card. They weren't poetry, they were coordinates. The MC took a step forward. The chaplain rose first. "Gunnery Sergeant," he said, gentle and level. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried. "The program has an order." The gunny grinned at him, friendly, defiant. "Father, the Corps taught me to adapt, and it taught you respect," the chaplain said. He didn't move closer. He didn't have to. "Let's show both." Something shifted then. Not the room. The air. It changed pressure. The junior Marines at the back straightened. My colonel set down his fork and folded his hands, face unreadable. My husband released my hand and squared his shoulders. I opened the notebook and slid it toward the edge of the table where anyone with eyes could see. The pages were neat. The ink didn't smudge. On the inside cover, tucked flat, was a photocopy with a header most of the room would recognize on sight. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. My father-in-law watched me look at the chaplain, then back to him. He mistook my silence for surrender. He lifted the mic again, raised his glass, and smiled like the evening already belonged to him. It didn't. He just didn't know it yet. The sound came first. The clean, glassy shatter of a fork hitting tile, followed by the fizz of champagne soaking into linen. Then nothing. Not quiet, nothing. The kind of silence you feel in your ears, heavy, suffocating, waiting for a command that never comes. My father-in-law stood center floor, mic in hand, grin fixed like a badge. "Some things aren't something," he had said. "They're nothing." The words still hung in the air like smoke after a rifle shot. He thought the room was laughing with him. He didn't notice the weight of the pause, the ripple of discomfort working its way through the tables like a tremor. I kept my breathing slow, My pulse was fast but even, the way it gets when you're braced under fire. One hand rested on the tablecloth, fingers brushing the edges of the black Write in the Rain notebook. The vows I'd written weren't poetry, they were coordinates, timings, words weighed like ammunition. I had tucked them into that field notebook on purpose. Tonight, that choice mattered. At the head table my husband's jaw was set. His wine glass stood untouched in front of him. His eyes flicked to mine, steady, searching. I gave the smallest nod. Not a signal, a confirmation. We had planned for this. The chaplain rose. He was a Navy commander, white collar crisp against his uniform, hair silvered but his voice clear. He didn't stride. He didn't need to. He walked with the calm certainty of someone who knew that authority didn't shout. He held up one hand, palm outward toward the MC who had been fumbling to retake control. The MC stepped back, relieved. "Ladies and gentlemen," the chaplain said, his voice level, carrying to every corner. "This is a wedding. Vows belong to the bride and groom, and vows will be heard as they were written." The room shifted, just slightly. Backs straightened, forks were set down. The word written carried weight. Written meant permanent. Written meant record. My father-in-law turned toward him with an easy grin. "Father, I was just giving the kid a hard time. Family tradition. No harm done." The chaplain didn't smile. He nodded toward me. "Captain, with your permission?" My throat was dry, but my voice came steady. "Yes, father. Read them aloud." I slid the notebook forward, across the white linen, until it rested at the edge of the head table. The small LED on the microphone flickered as it caught the chaplain's hand. 1947, glowing green against polished chrome. A timestamp burned into the memory of everyone watching. He took the notebook, thumbed to the first page, and let the silence settle. He didn't rush. He let the quiet grow thick until every whisper had died. When he finally spoke again, it was with the calm of liturgy. "These are not ordinary vows," he said. "They are promises, and some of them carry the weight of a citation." A murmur rippled through the officer's table. My colonel's eyes narrowed slightly. A staff sergeant at the back leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, but inside I felt the shift, the way a patrol feels when the wind changes, and the field suddenly belongs to you instead of the enemy. The chaplain's gaze swept the room. "Words matter here. Tonight we will hear them exactly as they were meant to be spoken." He paused, just long enough for his eyes to meet my father-in-law's. "And then you may decide what is nothing." The ballroom held its breath. The chaplain's voice was steady, each word clipped with the precision of someone used to delivering messages that carried weight far beyond the moment. He opened the notebook and began to read. "I vow," he said, "to protect this partnership with the same vigilance I once used to protect convoys en route Michigan." When the map said clear but the sensors said danger, I held my ground until the all clear was real. That caution spared lives. A hush rolled through the room. The veterans at table 4 shifted in their seats. They knew the name of that route, knew what it meant. I saw one lance corporal at the back glance at his sergeant, eyes wide. The chaplain turned the page. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. I vowed to stand steady, as I did on 14 May, when indirect fire rained on our forward post and communication lines faltered. I stayed on the net, maintaining contact, ensuring 6 Marines wounded in the blast reached Kasvak alive. My promise here is no different when the fire comes. I do not fall silent. The words weren't boasts. They weren't mine alone. They were the echoes of the official record, phrases lifted cleanly from a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal citation I had tucked between my vows. A copy sat folded at the back of the notebook. The chaplain knew it. So did the officers who recognized the cadence of formal language. A ripple moved across the crowd, the shift from doubt to realization. These weren't flowery words written for show. They were testimony. They were proof. My husband's father shifted in his chair, color draining from his face. His smile faltered, then disappeared altogether. He looked around the room for an ally, for a laugh to join his own. None came. The old Marines he had been holding court with now sat stiff-backed, eyes forward, their expressions tight. They knew what citations meant. They knew what silence in the face of them implied. The chaplain continued, unwavering. "I vow to honor those who are no longer here. Their names rest on her wrist tonight, etched in steel, not as decoration but as duty remembered." He gestured gently to my bracelet, the 3 names engraved there. "Each promise she makes is witnessed by the memory of those sacrifices. That is not nothing. That is the very definition of something." A murmur rose, then died, swallowed by the weight of the words. Across the room, the colonel who had once commanded me inclined his head, just slightly. A subtle acknowledgement, but one that did not go unnoticed. At the head table, my husband spoke for the first time since the toast had begun. His voice was low, even, directed not at the crowd but at his father. "She kept air and ground talking when men like you needed a corridor. That's the only reason some of them made it back." The chaplain closed the notebook, laying his hand on it, as if sealing a ledger. "Ladies and gentlemen, vows are more than words. They are records of past conduct, and promises of future faithfulness. Tonight we have heard both." The silence that followed wasn't the suffocating kind that had hung after the insult. This was different. This was the heavy stillness of respect settling into place. A respect you don't clap for. A respect that doesn't laugh. It just listens. My father-in-law's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He had wielded words like weapons for decades, cutting, mocking, dismissing. But here, against the calm authority of a chaplain reading a record, he had nothing. His arsenal was empty, and for the first time all evening I saw it in his eyes, the dawning realization that his definition of nothing had just been stripped of power. For a long moment, the ballroom stayed frozen, caught between the echoes of the chaplain's voice and the sound of its own silence. Then the shift came, quiet, subtle, undeniable. The retired Marines at table 4 pushed back their chairs and stood. One of them, a wiry man with a silver crew cut, crossed the floor and extended his hand to me. His palm was calloused, his grip firm. "Respect, ma'am," he said. "Just that.
Then he turned, nodded once to the chaplain, and sat down again. That broke the dam. Murmurs rippled through the guests. Not the gossiping kind, this was recalibration. The way a unit silently adjusts formation when the terrain changes. Heads turned, glances traded, postures corrected. The room was no longer laughing. It was listening. My father-in-law's face had gone pale under the ballroom lights. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came. His eyes darted to the men he'd been drinking with at the bar earlier, the ones who had chuckled at his jokes. They didn't look back. They kept their gaze fixed on the tablecloth, or the chaplain, anywhere but him. He was adrift in the very sea he had thought he commanded. The master of ceremonies, sensing the moment, stepped forward to retake control. "Thank you, Father Doyle," he said, voice measured. "We'll proceed with the program as planned." He gestured to the champagne flutes waiting for the official toast. The servers moved quickly, grateful for something practical to do. The ritual of ceremony resumed, fragile but intact. At the head table, my husband leaned slightly toward his father, voice low enough that only I could hear. "She's not nothing," he said. "She's the reason Marines made it back. You might want to remember that before you pick up another microphone." The old gunny swallowed hard, his jaw clenched. Finally, in a voice hoarse and stripped of bravado, he said, "Captain, I was out of line. I kept my face calm, neutral, professional." "Tonight is for respect," I answered. "Let's start there." He nodded once, quickly, as if the words were too heavy to carry any further. Then he sat back, silent. Later, in the hallway just outside the ballroom, I caught part of a conversation between him and my husband. I hadn't meant to overhear, but their voices carried. "I thought she was just admin," the gunny muttered. My husband didn't hesitate. "She is, the kind that brings sons home." That ended the exchange. There was no comeback for it. Back inside, the chaplain led a short prayer. Not about triumph, not about victory, but about humility and service. His words landed like a steadying hand on the shoulder of the room. Afterward, the clinking of glasses and the polite laughter of scheduled toasts filled the space again, but the tone had changed. It was softer, tempered. A final gesture sealed the recalibration. My father-in-law rose from his seat, walked to the chaplain, and pulled a check from his wallet. He signed it there at the head table, his pen scratching against the paper loud enough to be heard in the hush. He folded it once and handed it over. "For Fisher House," he said. "For the families." The chaplain took it with a nod. No applause followed, no theatrics, just quiet acknowledgement. A correction had been made, not loudly but clearly. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my glass or make a speech. I simply turned back to my husband, let my hand rest lightly on the Vows notebook still lying on the table, and smiled once, faint but steady. The fight was over. Not because I had won a duel of words, but because the room itself had reset its compass. From that point forward, no one called me nothing. They didn't need to call me anything at all. The silence was respect enough. The reception limped on, patched together with music and polite conversation, but I knew the axis had shifted. People didn't look at me with the same faint amusement anymore. The glances were different now, measured, steady, reluctant in some cases, but unmistakably different. The next morning, my phone buzzed before dawn. A text from a sergeant I'd once worked alongside during a joint exercise. "Ma'am, respect." That took more discipline than any formation I've stood in. Later that day, an email landed in my inbox from a mother whose son had served under our battalion. "Thank you for what you did last night. You reminded them all that quiet doesn't mean weak." Even within the family, the tone recalibrated. A week later, my father-in-law asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, more out of curiosity than obligation. We sat in a corner booth at a diner off the highway, the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee thick in the air. He kept fidgeting with his mug, tapping the handle, searching for words. "I used to measure worth in calloused hands," he said finally. His voice was lower than I'd ever heard it. "Scars you can see." He glanced at my bracelet. "You measure it in something else." I met his gaze evenly. "I measure it in lives returned." He looked away, but he didn't argue. That silence was more valuable than any apology. Weeks later, he joined us at a unit fundraiser. It wasn't a grand gesture. No speeches, no forced reconciliations. He simply walked in, shook the colonel's hand, and when people asked who I was, he said, "My daughter, the captain." Nothing added, nothing subtracted. For the first time, I wasn't defined by what he thought I lacked. The bracelet never left my wrist. I didn't need to explain it to anyone. Its meaning was mine alone. The Write in the Rain notebook, with Vows still tucked neatly around the citation, went back into the drawer beside my service records. I wrote in my personal log the way I'd write an after-action report. Event, reception, outcome, respect, re-established, lessons, facts, noise, bearing maintained. At night, sometimes I replayed the moment, the green LED on the mic, the hush of the crowd, the chaplain's calm authority. I thought about how quickly a room can turn from laughter to silence, from dismissal to acknowledgement. All it takes is truth, spoken without theatrics, backed by the weight of the record. I didn't need anyone to tell me I had won. The win wasn't in their words. It was in the absence of them. The missing chuckles, the missing jabs. For someone like me, silence was victory. The last image of that night that stays with me isn't my father-in-law's pale face or the chaplain's steady voice. It's something quieter. The dance floor later in the evening, when most guests had gone home, my husband and I standing alone under the chandelier. No music played. The DJ had already packed up, but he pulled me close anyway, his hand firm at the small of my back. We swayed in silence, the way you do when you don't need an audience. In that moment I realized the room could laugh, dismiss, or even try to erase me. It didn't matter. What mattered was this. I hadn't flinched. I hadn't broken. I had answered arrogance not with anger, but with fact. And the room had listened. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It never has. That night didn't end with fireworks or speeches. It ended the way the best victories do, quietly. No shouting, no gloating, no triumphant music swelling in the background. Just the truth standing where laughter used to be. I've thought about it often since. My father-in-law had called me nothing in front of 100 people, believing the room would cheer him on. Instead, the record stood up for me. My vows, my service, my proof. And once the truth was spoken, there was no unsaying it. That's the thing about respect. It can't be demanded, and it can't be faked. It can only be earned. But when it's denied out of arrogance, sometimes it has to be reclaimed. Not with fists, not with anger, but with quiet certainty and facts no one can argue. I didn't walk out of that ballroom vindicated. I walked out steady, because the lesson was simple, and I hope you carry it too. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Silence doesn't mean absence. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the record speak for itself. So let me ask you, have you ever seen someone underestimated until the truth stood up for them? Tell me in the comments. I'd like to hear your story. And if mine spoke to you, give this video a like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss tomorrow's story. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that quiet victories are still victories. Because here on Echoes of Revenge, we tell these stories every day about protocol, respect, and the hidden strength that only reveals itself when the world least expects it. The word nothing had echoed through that ballroom like a verdict. But by the end of the night, the verdict wasn't his to give. The record had spoken for me. The chaplain's voice, steady and calm, carried my vows into every corner of that hall, and when the silence finally returned, it wasn't suffocating, it was respect. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to shout. All I had to do was stand steady and let the truth carry its own weight. That night reminded me of something every Marine learns sooner or later. Arrogance makes noise, but real strength doesn't have to. Quiet doesn't mean weak. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever seen someone underestimated until the truth stood up for them? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if mine meant something to you, give this video a like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss tomorrow's story. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that protocol, respect, and hidden strength still matter. Because here on Echoes of Revenge, we share these stories every day. Stories where dignity wins, arrogance loses, and the quiet always carries further than the noise.